The restaurant was warm and loud, filled with voices that blended into a constant hum, but none of it felt like it belonged to me. I kept smoothing the front of my graduation gown, trying to remind myself that today was supposed to be special. I'd earned this. Years of late nights, skipped meals, taking work shifts no one else wanted, studying in hallways because I couldn't afford the dorms. This moment was supposed to mean something. But as always with my family, the focus drifted everywhere except toward me. My mother had invited half the relatives in the city, most of whom I hadn't spoken to in years. She wanted pictures for social media, not celebration. My sister Amy came late and immediately began complaining about the drive, the parking, the weather, anything except acknowledging that I had just crossed the stage hours earlier. Her son, Liam, was glued to his phone until he wasn't. At the time, I didn't know what he was planning, but looking back, maybe I should have sensed something. There was a strange energy around the table, the kind that feels like static before a storm. My cake sat in front of us, beautiful and untouched. White frosting, gold letters, and a small cap made of fondant. Congratulations, curled across the top like a promise I hadn't yet unwrapped. I leaned forward to finally read the rest of it. One moment. Just one quiet moment for myself. That's when Liam suddenly stood up. His chair screeched across the floor, sharp enough to make several people look. I thought he was reaching for his drink or maybe shifting seats, but in one strange, surreal movement he reached for the cake. Don't, I started, but the word barely formed. He lifted the cake stand with both hands. For half a second, I believed he was bringing it closer. Maybe he wanted to blow out the candle for me. Maybe he wanted attention, but harmless attention. Instead, he dropped it. The cake hit the floor with a heavy, wet smack. Frosting exploded into a white and gold halo on the tiles. A few pieces skidded across the ground. Some even landed on my shoes. Then Liam looked at me with a triumphant smirk that didn't belong on a child's face. "Eat it off the ground," he said, loud, proud, like he was making a joke for a crowd, and the crowd responded. My mother laughed first, sharp and sudden. My sister followed with a snort, then a full laugh, shaking her head like she'd just witnessed the funniest moment of the year. The rest of the table joined in, some slapping their palms, others pointing. Then came the worst part, the look they all shared, that shared amusement at my expense. A look that said, "This is your place. This is who you are to us." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stared at the ruined cake, the one thing that symbolized everything I had worked for, and felt something inside me shrink. Not break, not shatter. Just quietly fold into itself. My mother waved a hand dismissively. "It's just a cake. Don't make a scene." As if I had done something wrong. The humiliation was thick, clinging to my skin. I swallowed it down, even as my throat tightened and my chest ached. I forced myself to breathe, slow and controlled, because crying there would only add to their entertainment. "I'm going home," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother didn't stop me. My sister didn't ask why. No one stood, no one apologized, no one reached out. I walked out of the restaurant alone. The laughter still echoed behind me as the door shut. Outside, the air was cold and smelled like rain. It should have calmed me, but it didn't. I felt hollow, weightless, as if I'd been scooped out and left with only the shape of a person. Hours later, after showering and curling up on my bed in the quiet of my apartment, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting at least a half-hearted, "Sorry about earlier," something, anything. Instead, I saw, "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." And beneath it, the notification that my sister had liked the message. I stared at the screen, letting the words sink into the same place inside me where the laughter had settled. Something deep and cold unfurled slowly, breaking the last thread I had been holding on to. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just typed one single reply, calm as still water, "Okay." And in that moment, silence became my sharpest weapon. The silence in my apartment felt strangely comforting the next morning, a kind of quiet that wrapped around me like a blanket. But underneath that stillness, a pulse of something steadier, colder, more deliberate began forming. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. It had stopped buzzing around 3 in the morning, but only because I had turned it face down and let it ring itself into exhaustion. The last message I'd sent, removing my name from every loan tomorrow, still sat at the bottom of the family group chat, unread by no one. They had read it. They just didn't know how to respond. But I did. It was strange how memory works. How it drags things forward when you're finally ready to see them clearly. I thought back to each time they needed me. The first loan I took out was for my mother's medical procedure years ago. She had cried on the phone, telling me she had no one else. I was 19, terrified and determined to help. I signed the papers without hesitation, without reading the fine print. She promised she would handle the payments. She never made a single one. Then came my sister, a new car she needed for her job. She convinced me to co-sign. "You know I have bad credit," she'd said. "But you're responsible." Responsible, that was the word they always used. Never helpful, never kind. Just responsible, like a label glued to my forehead. Next was the home repair credit line, supposedly temporary, supposedly just until the taxes come in. Another promise that dissolved into nothing. I was the one who paid, month after painful month, watching my account drain and my dreams get smaller so theirs could stay afloat. They never thanked me, not once. And now, after everything, they had told me to stay away forever, like I was the problem in their lives, like I was dead weight they needed to cut off. If they truly wanted me gone, I could respect that. More than that, I could honor it. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee mug, warming my palm. I got up slowly, almost ceremonially, and grabbed a folder from my drawer. Inside was everything: loan agreements, co-signer documents, credit reports, statements with my name shining like a neon warning. I laid them out on the table one by one. Seeing it all together made something in my chest loosen. These papers had been chains disguised as favors. Not anymore. I showered, got dressed, tied my hair back, and put on shoes that made my steps feel firm, planted. Every motion felt purposeful, every breath steady. I grabbed my keys. Before leaving, I glanced once more at my silent phone lying on the couch like a sleeping enemy. I didn't take it with me. The first bank was quiet, almost empty, sunlight slanting across the floor. Sitting in the office of a loan specialist, I felt oddly detached, like I was watching someone else speak with calm certainty. "I'd like to remove myself as co-signer," I said. The specialist nodded, tapping at her keyboard. She asked for documents, identification, signatures. I provided everything. Each form I signed felt like clipping a thread, freeing myself a little more each time. At the credit union, it was the same. A few signatures, a soft click of approval, and suddenly my sister's car loan was no longer tied to my name. I wondered if she felt it. Some shift in the universe, a string snapping. I hoped she did. By the time I reached the loan office for my mother's account, my steps felt lighter. I explained the situation clearly, honestly. The representative walked me through the steps to transfer responsibility. It was long, complicated, and required follow-up, but the process was set in motion. When I left the third office, a wind picked up, brushing against my face like something fresh and promising. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight, and that's when I checked my phone. 34 missed calls from my sister, 20 from my mother. Dozens from uncles, cousins, even numbers I didn't recognize. Messages ranged from confusion to panic to outright hostility. "You can't do this." "Fix it now." "You're being dramatic." We didn't mean what we said. All those words. All that noise. But the one thing I'd needed, an apology, was nowhere. Not that I expected one. By midnight, the numbers climbed past 100. They filled the screen like frantic claw marks. I let the phone vibrate until the battery died. I didn't recharge it. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dim and quiet, and exhaled slowly. For the first time, I understood something. I hadn't lost a family today. I had finally recognized what they'd always been. The next morning carried a different kind of silence. One that didn't sting but hummed with the soft, steady rhythm of resolve. I woke before my alarm, the faint morning light stretching across my ceiling like the beginning of something new. For once, my chest didn't feel tight. For once, there wasn't that familiar heaviness settling in the space just behind my ribs. I made coffee slowly, savoring the simple act of existing without anyone demanding anything from me. But the peace didn't last long. At exactly 8:12 a.m., pounding rattled my front door, sharp and angry. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. Their voices carried through the thin hallway walls, my mother's frantic tone, my sister's shrill panic. I didn't move toward the door. I just sat at my small kitchen table, sipping my coffee, listening to the storm outside it. My sister was the loudest. "Open the door! We need to talk! You can't just abandon us like this!" My mother chimed in. "You are being unreasonable. Stop acting like a child and come fix what you ruined." Funny how the script had flipped overnight. Yesterday I was told to stay away forever. Today, I was suddenly essential. I stared at the door, not even tempted. After a few minutes, their pounding shifted into desperate knocks, then into muffled conversations between themselves. "She can't hide forever," my mother muttered. "She has to fix this." My sister insisted, but I didn't owe them my presence. Not anymore. Eventually they left, leaving behind only silence and a few footsteps fading down the hall. My coffee had gone cold, but it didn't matter. The victory wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, like a breath I'd been holding for years finally exhaled. Later that day, I returned to the bank for the final signature needed to complete the removal process. The woman assisting me recognized me from the day before. She smiled gently, in a way that told me she remembered my story without needing to hear it again. "Almost done," she said, sliding the last form across the desk. My pen hovered over the dotted line for a moment. A long moment. Signing it felt like crossing a threshold, leaving behind not just financial ties, but years of emotional ones too, ones that had never been healthy or nurturing. When I pressed the pen down and scrawled my name, it felt like cutting an umbilical cord that should have been severed long ago. Walking out of that office was surreal. The sun was bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Cars passed, people laughed on sidewalks, life continued like nothing monumental had just occurred. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. Over the next week, the real consequences of my withdrawal began to take shape. My sister's car was repossessed within days. It happened early one morning, the tow truck blocking her driveway. I knew because she sent me a series of furious voice messages, screaming, accusing, sobbing. "You running me! I have more! I have a child! You selfish little." I stopped listening after the first few seconds. Those words had carved deep wounds in the past now. They slid off me like water. My mother's loan was next to unravel. The interest spiked, payments bounced, and the bank began calling her nonstop. She tried to forward the calls to me, but my new number, changed that same week, remained mercifully hidden. The home repair credit card went into collections. I heard through my cousin, who called me out of curiosity rather than concern, that my mother had spent an entire afternoon screaming into the phone about ungrateful children. Unconsciously, I smiled. It wasn't joy at their suffering. It wasn't cruelty. It was relief. Relief that their emergencies weren't mine anymore. Relief that their chaos no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. Relief that, for the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for the fires they refused to stop starting. One evening, a few days after the repo, my sister showed up at my apartment again. She didn't scream this time. She didn't bang or demand. She just stood there in the hallway, eyes red, voice hoarse. "Please," she whispered through the door. "Just help us." One more time. Her voice wavered. For a moment, I felt something twist inside me, old habits, old guilt. But then another memory rose up laughter at the restaurant, sharp and cruel. The cake on the floor, the command to eat it off the ground. My mother's text telling me to stay away forever, and the little thumbs up from my sister. Just like that, the guilt evaporated. I didn't open the door. She eventually walked away, her footsteps soft and defeated, and inside my apartment, I stood very still, letting the quiet settle around me again. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't isolation. It was peace, the kind I had never known while living under the shadow of a family that only loved what I could do for them. In their collapse, I wasn't triumphant, but I was finally free. Time has a strange way of moving after a storm. The days following my family's collapse didn't feel triumphant or dramatic, they were just quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. I started therapy, something I'd been meaning to do for years, but never had time. For because I was too busy fixing other people's emergencies, my therapist listened without judgment as I unpacked years of resentment I didn't even know had names. Shame, obligation, misplaced loyalty, exhaustion that sat in my bones like a winter that never ended. Each session peeled back a layer I had wrapped around myself to survive. Slowly, my world grew larger. I met new people at work and found myself invited to dinners, game nights, even a short hiking trip. They didn't know my past. They didn't expect anything from me except to show up. It felt foreign at first, being included without being needed. But I leaned into it, letting myself experience life without the constant fear of disappointing someone. I learned to cook meals for one without feeling sad about it. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen because I liked the way they brightened the room. I spent long afternoons reading at the park, feeling sunlight on my skin, realizing how long it had been since I allowed myself simple joys. And in that slow, gentle rebuilding, something else began to shift. The story of the ruined cake, the humiliation that had once burned like a fresh wound, began to soften at the edges. It became a memory, not a prison. One afternoon, after a therapy session that left me tearful but lighter, I passed a small bakery on my way home. The smell of vanilla and warm sugar pulled me inside. In the corner of the bakery, a little girl stood on her toes pointing at a cake decorated with a rainbow of candies. Her father crouched beside her, smiling patiently as she explained which colors she wanted more of. Something warm and heavy swelled in my chest. I realized I'd been avoiding bakeries subconsciously, afraid the sight of a cake would remind me too sharply of that day. But this time, it didn't hurt. It just reminded me of what I deserved, of how that moment had pushed me toward freedom. So I bought a cake. A big one, white frosting with gold letters that simply said, "You did it." My throat tightened as I held the box, but not with sadness. With pride, I drove straight to a local youth shelter and handed it to a volunteer. "This is for someone who needs to know they matter today," I said, and I meant it. Months passed before the first letter arrived in my mailbox. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, tight, and slanted to the left. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. Her words spilled across the page in wavering lines, an apology wrapped in excuses. She said she acted out of stress, didn't mean what she said, didn't realize how much I had done for them until everything fell apart. She asked me to come home for a conversation. No mention of the cake, no acknowledgement of the years of financial reliance, just regret soaked in fear of facing consequences alone. My sister's email arrived a week later, more desperate than apologetic. She begged me to reconsider, told me Liam missed me a lie, so thin I could see through it instantly, said they needed me again. For a long time, I stared at both messages, waiting for a part of me to soften, to feel the urge to fix things again. But that urge didn't come. What came instead was a calm sense of closure. Not anger, not bitterness, just the understanding that some relationships don't need repair, they need release. I didn't respond. On the 1-year anniversary of my graduation, I bought myself another cake. I brought it home, placed it gently on my kitchen table, lit a single candle, and sat by the open window as the soft evening light poured in. I took a slow bite, letting the sweetness fill my mouth, letting the moment settle into my bones. There was no audience, no laughter, no cruelty. Just me, whole, steady, and finally choosing myself. The sweetest revenge wasn't the collapse of their finances or the silence I left them with. It was this, the quiet, peaceful freedom of a life where no one could ever throw my joy onto the floor again.